Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's a joy to be with all of you today as we gather for a very important moment, the launch of the Cooperative for Humanity and the next chapter of what we call Peace in Motion. I would like to begin by expressing my heartfelt gratitude to our moderator, Lindsay Howard of Bloomberg, and to our distinguished panelists, Dr. Bruce Stillman, Liz Hume, Gordon Winston, and Mark Minovich. Each brings an essential perspective to this conversation, and together they remind us of something very important, that peace can no longer be understood as the work of one discipline alone. It must be built collaboratively across sectors, across institutions, and across the international community. For too long, governments alone have been expected to carry the burden of solving our greatest global challenges, even as so many are mired in gridlock. But the future will not be shaped by governments alone. It will also be shaped by the private sector, by civil society, by innovators, by educators, by scientists, and by those willing to bring greater synergy and coherence to a fragmented world. And this and that idea is part of what brings us here today. Several years ago, during our convening at the United Nations, we introduced a very bold proposition. Peace is not simply the absence of conflict, but something that must be intentionally constructed. We proposed that peace should be approached with the same seriousness, imagination, and ingenuity that we bring to science, technology, finance, and infrastructure. At that time, I spoke about the need to construct the DNA of peace, to identify the structural conditions necessary to build sustainable, active peace in the 21st century. And since then, through dialogue and research, partnership, and practice, that framework has become clearer. And what we have learned is this: peace lives in systems. It lives in health and well-being. It lives in education and culture. It lives in environment and energy, and it lives in innovation and infrastructure. These pillars are deeply interconnected, and together they form what we now call the DNA of peace. But if we're serious about constructing the DNA of peace, then we must also be very serious about deconstructing the DNA of violence, the habits, assumptions, and internal narratives that have normalized division, fear, paralysis, and conflict. Peace is not merely a theory. It must move from the theoretical to the operational. It must become radically practical. That means developing a new kind of collaboration, one with the strength to move things, to galvanize multilateral efforts, and to serve as a kind of global laboratory for what peace can look like in practice. It means building not just vision, but implementation, not just aspiration, but traction. Innovation, after all, needs a landing platform, and we can no longer tolerate this paralysis of peace. If peace is built through systems, then we must also build a community that reflects those systems, a community where leaders from many sectors can come together around a shared purpose and learn to engineer peace like war, strategically, intentionally, and at scale. In many ways, I think of us as a grand central station, a meeting place where many lines converge and where connection creates momentum. And that is what we hope the Cooperative for Humanity will be, a place where leaders from peace building and science, business, technology, education, energy, finance, and diplomacy, and certainly culture come together, not to leave behind their own work, but to strengthen it through shared vision and common purpose. And perhaps that is why this moment asks something more of us. Real transformation is rarely born in comfort. It is forged in a crucible, under pressure, under risk, under conditions that test what is essential and call forth courage, trust, and imagination. In that sense, Artemis 2 offers a powerful reminder. Human beings rode this incredible fire that they experienced. And that was really, really something that we realized when we heard the astronauts speak about the familiar boundaries in a spacecraft called integrity, and reminded us that the future belongs to those willing to venture beyond what has already been accepted as possible. Peace, too, will not be born of passivity. It must be forged with boldness, with vision, and with the willingness to build something worthy of humanity's future. This moment does not call for small thinking. We have to reshape the neurological structure, not by incrementalism, but by boldness, inventiveness, and the willingness to take meaningful risks in service of humanity's future. We are living in a time when the speed of technology is accelerating faster than the moral, psychological, and ethical frameworks needed to guide it. So one of the great questions before us is this: how do we connect the speed of technology with the unlimited potential of the human mind, while also meeting the existential challenges that come with it? How do we optimize our destiny rather than just drift into it? How do we engineer peace with the same discipline, commitment, and strategic seriousness with which the world has so often engineered conflict? So again, we must ask the big question: what would it look like to design peace into the systems that shape our world? What would it look like to build peace into how we educate, innovate, invest, govern, and care for human well-being? What would it look like to increase peace literacy on a scale never seen before, to create not only informed minds, but transformed imaginations, to reshape our internal narrative, to deepen our moral sensibility, and generate the kind of emotional contagion that makes peace feel not distant or passive, but urgent, practical, and possible? Let us use hope as a bridge. Perhaps what is needed now is nothing less than a new global ethic, a new worldview, a new nucleus of shared responsibility, a kind of new software for the planet. The Cooperative for Humanity is our response to that need. It is a platform for collaboration, a structure for participation, and an invitation to leaders across sectors to help construct the DNA of peace in practical and enduring ways. Over the next 18 months, we will continue this work through conversations, convenings, publications, and collaborative initiatives. Today is the beginning of something public and shared. Today, we put peace into motion. Thank you, all of you, for being here, for lending your voice, your ideas, your presence to this growing global movement. And now, it is my very great pleasure to turn the program over to our wonderful moderator, Lindsay Howard of Bloomberg.
Thank you, Barbara, for your introduction, your opening remarks, your inspiration, and a blueprint for action for all of us. Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to all of our guests and participants. We are delighted to bring together this distinguished group of leaders for a conversation on the intersection of peace and innovation today. This panel asks a practical question. If peace is not only an aspiration, but something we must actively design, build, and sustain, what does each sector need to contribute now? Over the next several minutes, we will hear from leaders working across health and science, peace building, energy and infrastructure, and artificial intelligence. Each brings distinct perspective on what peace requires in this moment and how their field can help shape the course of discussion and collaboration over the next 18 months. Our goal is not only to hear 4 separate viewpoints, but to explore how these fields connect and what becomes possible when we begin to treat peace as a shared infrastructure and as a shared responsibility in these very fraught times of turmoil, but also endless possibility. I'd like to begin with a transition to the human foundation of any peaceful society, the conditions that allow life to flourish, turning to Dr. Bruce Stillman to speak about health, science, and human flourishing. Our first speaker, Dr. Bruce Stillman, is president and CEO of Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, one of the world's leading institutions in biomedical research and education. His career has literally advanced our understanding of DNA replication and the biological mechanisms that sustain life. He brings a powerful perspective on health, on science, and on human flourishing as the essential foundations for peace. Dr. Stillman, could you enlighten all of us on why peace must be built on the conditions that allow human life to flourish?
Thank you very much, Lindsay, and thank you, Barbara. In Barbara's introduction, she mentioned innovation and sustainability and health, and all of those are rooted in deep science. I work on DNA, and in fact, all of us in the entire population on Earth are 99.9% related in their DNA sequence. We are all part of one humanity, and we should have a peace initiative that brings all of those people together. The variation between individuals is more within a local population is more than the variation between different races on Earth. And so this concept of differences is not rooted in our genetics and our history. And we are all one humanity. And in fact, human migration, is the norm and not the exception. And understanding that and educating the population about this and how we are all related, I think, is one of the roots of peace. We should be using science, and particularly DNA, to help peace initiatives and also conflict initiatives. For instance, DNA has been used to identify victims of war crimes. It has been used to help communities bring each other together who have lost connections through ancestry. And it has also opened up the opportunity to bring people who have committed war crimes to justice by analyzing DNA and other aspects of populations that have been pursued during wars. Promoting international scientific cooperation is therefore essential. One example is the large-scale Human Genome Project, where many, many countries came together to cooperate and sequence the human genome, and out of that has come enormous benefits for human health. But it wasn't just the human genome that was sequenced, it was many, many genomes. Genomes of small organisms such as fungi and bacteria, but also plant species and many other animal species. These have given us an enormous insight into the nature of life on the planet and allows us to think about sustainability. As we have climate change, we are going to have ability to grow plants and food in challenging situations on Earth that are changing all of the time. And genetics and plant biology is going to impact that enormously. It already is doing that at Cold Spring Harbor, where our plant scientists are working with people in Africa to modify and help develop plants that are native to their area that will be able to grow in challenging environmental conditions. So food security is going to be huge for understanding peace. And in fact, what most people really want and will avoid conflict is for them to have an economic viability and sustainability, which includes access to health and food. And if everybody had that, I think there would be less conflict in the world. So we have to promote international scientific cooperation. Just like Doctors Without Borders, we should have Science Without Borders. The idea is that scientists should get together and not only cooperate across countries, which has happened in a number of examples, but I think it also should be the case that we get together and educate the population. As we have seen in recent years, science has become under attack because of political situations and considerations. And the public have been bought into this because of social media and other aspects of propagating information across populations. And scientists, and in fact this initiative, should work cooperatively together to educate the population on what is actually the reality and not what they read in social media. And if we do that as a cooperative, a scientific cooperation across countries and across initiatives and institutions, I think we will enormously benefit the Peace Initiative. So I'm very pleased to be part of this organization and part of the Cooperative for Humanity program. And I look forward to hearing my fellow panelists in their pursuit of the peace that we all seek. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stillman. One brief follow-up question. Your work has centered on the mechanisms of DNA and chromatin duplication, and you lead one of the world's major research and education institutes. From your vantage point, how should we think about health and scientific progress and as a foundational condition rather than separate from peace? And with that, does it matter that the United States has moved from being 69% of global R&D GDP from the 1960s to now being 27%? Is that yet another challenge? Thank you.
Yes, I think one of the challenges that we have at the moment is the support of science in the United States. It is under reduced support, and other countries are increasingly supporting science. That is not necessarily a bad thing because science has no borders and medicine has no borders. Infectious disease have no borders. And so the more scientists throughout the world that are working to try and address the health and medical issues and food sustainability, the better. Of course, we always have to worry about security, national security, and that is where maybe national boundaries do play a role in science. But for health and sustainability, I don't see any problem with working across nations. But the United States has been and is recognized to be one of the leading research countries that have ever existed. And the amount of science that has come out of the United States since the Second World War, when Vannevar Bush declared the new frontier of science, has been quite extraordinary. And I think we really need to continue that and have the United States being one of the countries that welcomes scientists, as I did coming from Australia to the United States 47 years ago, to work, and it gave me extraordinary opportunities to do what I have achieved.
Thank you, Dr. Stillman, for the science perspective we all need to keep in focus. I'd like to turn to Liz Hume to speak about peace-building practice and institutional resilience. We are honored to hear from Liz Hume, the Executive Director of the Alliance for Peacebuilding, and her weighty charge of overseeing 300 other organizations and coordinating with them. For more than 2 decades of experience across peace-building, conflict prevention, development, and governance, she brings a grounded view of what it takes to build resilience in fragile and conflict-affected settings. I will add that Liz is partly responsible for the legal frameworks that resulted in the successful Dayton Accords after the brutal war in the former Yugoslavia. She also has contributed to transition for one of Africa's longest civil wars around Senegal, and has vast other experience around the world in each of the continents. Liz, could we hear from you on what peace building knows that other sectors now need to hear?
Thank you so much, Lindsay. And I'm so excited to be here today. What an incredible panelist. And thank you so much, Barbara, for pulling this all together. And I just love this question. What peace building knows that other sectors need to know? Research shows us that, people don't realize how kind and generous and open-minded people are and how actually cynical thinking deepens societal problems. Cynicism doesn't turn us into, going deep into what's wrong, but it stops us from thinking how we fix it. And that's what peace builders do in the peace building field. We're working in the most conflict affected, fragile states and saying, okay, what's causing this? What can we do? How can we work together to build, to prevent conflict, to build sustainable peace? And, we can prevent conflict. We can build sustainable peace. We have data that shows that. And unfortunately, last year in 2025, the funding cuts, in the United States, Germany, the UK, et cetera, have shut down so many programs that were working globally. And recent data is showing us that due to these cuts, in Africa, we already have a 5% increase in violent conflict. Um, and that's on top of already record breaking, increasing global violent conflict, numbers that we have not seen since World War II. We've blown through all those records. So, peace builders, we're not naive, we're not Pollyanna. We're not, kind of the kumbaya when people think of, the peace sign. It's not a utopia. It's really, really hard work. And, together, the Alliance for Peacebuilding and many of our members, we developed the Global Fragility Act a few years ago, which was bipartisan. Senator Lindsey Graham, Secretary Rubio, Senator Coons, they were our co-sponsors. Together, we worked together to say, okay, how can U.S. assistance work better in this, record-breaking, increasing global violent conflict? How can we do it better? How can we use evidence? How can we adapt easier, change programs when they're not working? And this legislation, the Global Fragility Act, passed overwhelmingly bipartisan at a time when a lot, people don't think we can do it here in the United States. We are doing that. So I think that that's really important to understand that there are things that we can be doing, but it's not a one and done, right? It's ongoing work. You have to build it. You have to monitor it. You have to, okay, now, this issue is coming up. And a lot of times, again, the cynicism comes into play where, oh, you can't prevent wars, you can't prevent conflict, you know, and and I think Dr. Bruce Tillman would agree with me. Uh, we haven't cured cancer yet, but we don't just throw up our hands and say, "Oh, well, we can't do that." So, we know another virus is going to come through, so let's not work on it. And that is where I really think people have to understand that we can prevent conflict. We can build civil society as an incredible, vaccine inoculation to conflict. And I just want to highlight one of our partners, Roots and Wings in Hungary. Last week when we were preparing for these sessions, didn't even think about this. Hungary had historic elections, and and that gives us so much hope. Um, and when we were working, we had this partner, Roots and Wings, with us in Nairobi at a conference a couple of months ago. And how do you guys continue working there? Civil society is under threat. Um, you're not seeing a lot of hope there. And they're like, well, we have to continue. We have to do this work. They went where they could go. They went down at the community level. They were strengthening civil society. And, this week, I was able to write to him, You guys did it. Congratulations. There's so much that we all could be learning from you. So I think that that's a really important thing to understand how civil society, and civil society is so strong in the United States. If you look at indexes, we're off the charts on that. And that's something that we have to make sure continues here in the US. Um, but like Barbara said, we need to think big, we need to be innovative. And AFP, the Alliance for Peace Building, is we're stepping up. We've created a coalition on the future of peace and security. We want to make sure that we are, that our government and other governments are prioritizing conflict prevention. They're integrating it into our strategies and laws and our policies and our programs. And that's really where we need to go. And it's easy to be cynical, but we can't be because we have to start making a dent and tackling these issues. I say violent conflict is one of the greatest problems that we are experiencing right now. And we have to do it collectively. And so I welcome this platform, and I am just so grateful for you all.
Thank you, Liz. A brief follow-up question before we move to our next speaker. You are a successful policy practitioner, so you've proven that cynicism is a luxury we don't have and change the odds. You bring decades of experience in peace building policy across Asia, Eastern Europe, and Africa. What are the most important lessons that you can share? And what do most non-peace sectors most often misunderstand about how peace is built and sustained for the longer term?
That it's not, again, one and done, and it takes a really, really long time. We started working on the Global Fragility Act in 2015. Uh, and, we had to work and get it passed over, through different administrations. Uh, that just because you get a law passed or a program done doesn't mean that it's going to be implemented robustly. And so it's something that you just have to keep chipping away at, chipping away at. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons. When people hear that I've been working on the Global Fragility Act since 2015, even though it passed in 2019, and just to put it into context, my kids were in middle school and now they're out of college. So that should tell you something. Um, that you can integrate peace building and conflict prevention in other sectors. And COVID was a perfect example of that. It's not just, I used to say it's not just a health crisis. It is also, the United States, for example, on every pandemic index should have knocked, our response to COVID out of the park, but we didn't. And we didn't because the United States, we are increasingly polarized and, increasing political violence. And, that caused us to not be able, to address COVID as well as we could have. And it also increased conflict in the United States. It increased the drivers of instability. And so, even though we got in the policies under the Trump administration and the Biden administration to get peace building and conflict prevention integrated into the COVID strategies here and abroad, it didn't happen. We weren't able to, the work wasn't prioritized, let's say. And so that is one of my biggest pleas of, we can do this, we know how to do it, and we need folks in the health sector, in the education sector, humanitarian sector, to know that we can integrate this work.
Thank you, Liz. We'd like to turn now to Gordon Winston as our third speaker. Our next perspective broadens the lens further into systems of energy, infrastructure, and investment that shape long-term stability. Gordon will speak to us about environment, energy, capital, and systems. He is the CEO of QGEMS Energy, a QSEC grid company His work spans critical energy infrastructure, data security and sovereignty, and transition in economic investment. He offers a unique perspective and experience on how energy, data security, and infrastructure influence resilience, equity, and the conditions for peace. He will explain to us why energy and systems design are now core peace questions. Gordon, could we turn to you to enlighten us?
Absolutely. Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you to the other panelists, and of course to my mother for the opportunity to bring this important initiative further forward and advancing the breadth and scope of those participating in the Cooperative for Humanity. This initiative began a number of years with the premise that peace must be designed into systems that people rely on every day. And the name itself is really synonymous with the intersection of peace and innovation, and more importantly, the future state of the world that we all live in and will leave our children and those generations hence. My topic of discussion kind of frames that narrative, but it looks at it from the perspective of a system as a system that's built with resilience. It's one where trust and inclusion and practical durability are built into it from the onset, not as an afterthought. In exactly the same way that today the definition of peace is a variety of different cultural perspectives. I don't see it as a diplomatic achievement, but rather as a systems-based achievement. Energy today is foundational because almost every institution and service depends on reliable power. This world of the digitalization of the world that we live in today is predicated on the existence of infrastructure that doesn't fail. As infrastructure fails, it quickly becomes very fragile. Society becomes fragile, and the failure of healthcare, education, business, and community life ensues. So we broadly talk about the energy transition, but it supports peace only if it improves security, is able to address reliability, affordability, access, and fairness. And capital allocation is decisive because it determines what gets built, what gets neglected, and who actually benefits from this allocation. Investors and system builders should ask whether systems reduce fragility, whether they strengthen trust, and support long-term stability of nations, countries, municipalities. These frameworks are critical around the world. And the time that we spent early on with the University for Peace looking at circular-based economies, these frameworks were always brought to light. How do you actually address this at a local level? But from a local level, how do you further address that at a nation state level? And in each and every discussion, it became a matter of a local-based economy. You cannot have local-based economies and health systems unless, in fact, you do have underlying power, energy, and the capability of that direct improvement. In the world that we live in today, health, peace building, energy, and AI, which Mr. Minovich will talk about, are now deeply interconnected into one shared system. So the innovation itself strengthens peace when it expands resilience, access, trust, and security. And of course, it weakens peace when it concentrates power, it increases exposure, or leaves people more vulnerable. And the question of vulnerability is one that continues to permeate this discussion. The immediate agenda is to strengthen critical infrastructure. And by that, you also build trusted digital architecture, directing capital towards long-term resilience, and aligning with foundational principles that actually translate into a better future state. Why now? Why is this so important? Well, there are pressures today that are shaping the world within we live in, that are questioning the framework of peace-based dictate. Infrastructural vulnerabilities, energy insecurity, technological disruption, and economic instabilities now directly affect social stability. While diplomacy remains essential, it cannot by itself stabilize these fragile systems. And peace now has to be built into the infrastructure of everyday life.
Thank you, Gordon. Your work spans energy, data security, and investment strategy, including QGEM's model for an energy hypergrid concept. Could you speak to us in a little more depth about what is the clearest link between energy transition and social stability, and what a responsible peace-oriented infrastructure agenda looks like over the next 18 months?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, Lindsay. The power systems in the world are all under incredible duress. When the foundational grid infrastructure was built, it wasn't built with this sort of hyperscale ever envisioned. The builders of Mr. Alex Graham Bell and others almost 100 years ago never conceived of this hyperbolic, right, requirement of energy and of course power. The foundational grid was designed as an analog infrastructure, and interestingly, it remains the last bastion of analog infrastructure around the entire world. So while every sector of business and the economy have meaningfully navigated through the digitalization process, grid infrastructure remains the last bastion of analog infrastructure that has not yet gone through this same digitalization process. The demand for power or energy to power data centers, depending upon whose source, will double, triple, quadruple over the course of the next 5, 10, 20 years. There is massive global need for more energy. And it's clear that the existing infrastructure has become incredibly unstable. The hypergrid concept, Lindsay, is a pragmatic one that looks at the existing infrastructure and takes lessons from the existing migration through effectively network architecture and applies those same sort of principles into the realm of building a digital ecosystem that's actually able to support the digitalization of existing analog-based infrastructure. At its most fundamental level, what QGEMS has built is a grid edge network operating system that brings that connectivity into the future state. It's through this connectivity that we're actually able to integrate, aggregate, and orchestrate and bring better optimization to be able to optimize across and within the built environment that we currently operate within. Our discussions have now expanded into, I know Bruce mentioned earlier, space, but we're thinking about the same principal capabilities and applying them into space-based energy consumption for exactly the same reason. The motivating factor for not only business is actually to drive sustainability, but it's also to bring resilience and redundancy into the grid infrastructure and do this in such a way that provides affordability, pricing, reliability, and an energy system that does not deteriorate and ultimately collapse.
Thank you, Gordon. You've given us great perspectives on how peace is also shaped by systems people depend on every day and how those systems are financed and governed. We'd like to transition now to the next frontier, the technologies and digital systems now reshaping society at unprecedented speed. We are very fortunate to have Mark Minovich with us to speak about AI, digital governance, and the future of infrastructure. Mark Minovich is a global strategist in artificial intelligence, digital transformation, and innovation. His work spans business, public policy, sustainability, and multilateral engagement. He brings a future-facing perspective on how AI and digital infrastructure can influence peace, trust, and global resilience. Mark, could you enlighten us on whether AI becomes a peace multiplier or a destabilizing force?
So thank you very much, Lindsay, and thank you very much, Barbara, for putting this Peace Innovation Initiative webinar together to address very complex issues. First of all, AI is today transforming lives of billions of people. I'm talking about billions across the world. We simply, in every sector, in every industry, AI is making a difference. But still, a lot of people are very concerned, are very scared of AI. And one example, Lindsay, for your question regarding peace principles and where we are in terms of our AI infrastructure, I want to give an example that will relate to the audience that is listening to us. When we talk about peace, we unfortunately have to talk about a conflict. And there's a conflict which is going on now in the Middle East. Part of it is very prosperous Middle East. It happened close to 45, 46 days ago. And I think it will answer the question much more than any framework could put together. Remember those dates, dear audience. On March the 2nd, the Iranian drones hit the Qatar's Ras Laffan industrial city. It is the world's largest LNG export hub. Following that ballistic missile strike, there was another strike on March 18th, which damaged several LNG trains. What people are missing is that Ras Laffan produces roughly 30% of the world's helium. Why am I talking about helium related? Because it's crucial. Critical cooling agent for EUV lithography machines that fabricate every advanced chip on Earth that is being used by NVIDIA and other companies. One company specifically, ASML, that's actually in Netherlands, not in United States, one of the great Dutch companies, makes every single machine that makes those chips. The entire global AI supply chain flows through that facility. And it just shattered something in the Gulf. As you know, Stargate, one of the initiatives that is funded by SoftBank, by UAE sovereign funds, it's over 1 gigawatt, as you know, Gordon, supercomputer complex in Abu Dhabi. It's coming online. It was supposed to be coming online this year in phases. There's also a project in Saudi Arabia called Humane, which is building AI factories, targeting 500 megawatts of compute, maybe even more. So the paradox that I want to leave this panel is the same sovereign funds, the oil funds, that is making this whole notion of sovereignty, that independence, saying that we're going to control our destiny, we're going to control our future with AI, having greater ambition, is also correlated with the same Hormuz tension that is threatening energy that Gordon spoke about, that is threatening cooling infrastructure, that the AI hubs or clusters, however we want to say, depend on. This is what I call a recursive instability. This recursive instability loop that nobody modeled in any peace architecture around the world. This is a complete design failure that we're here to name, and we got to work on it. Making a peace a design principle, for me, means one question. In every layer of the stack, and I mean the technology stack, does the system create dependency or does it build capability? Right now, the scale is completely wrong. And I also want to address Because of this prime example that I gave, I see tremendous risks in the AI landscape that we need to talk about. And I'm primarily going to speak on three because we're short on time. First is that we have collapse of the shared reality. China's influence today on operations in 2026, where we're operating, is not just propaganda. It is contesting and eroding trust in global systems. It is attrition after crisis. The peace risk is not about just deepfakes. No, it's not. It's a destruction of the common factual ground in which every ceasefire and every negotiation depends. It's not only China, other countries are doing the same, and we have to stop this. And that's the point of this initiative. Second, United Nations is watching this. The World Bank is taking place in an IMF summit now in Washington, D.C. Everybody's coming together, semaphore with top CEOs in the world. Autonomous weapons, we have seen it now in the Gulf, is removing human judgment. Is that okay? Is this okay with us? The UN Secretary General set a 2026 deadline for binding treaty on autonomous weapons. This deadline will not be met. No way. The powers blocked it. Research confirms that 80% of the simulated war games that are happening within Department of War and NATO, autonomous systems are misrepresenting counterstrikes, precipitating full conflicts. This is not a 2030 problem, ladies and gentlemen. This is the problem right now today. Finally, workforce displacement. Without a transition architecture, we're going to be in trouble, all of us. On March 31st, Oracle sent 30,000 termination emails at 6 a.m. And I wrote about this on my media and also on major media that I write. With no prior warning, it happened. Q1 2026, we have seen 78,000 technology layoffs in my field, many of them in Silicon Valley, where I work. 48% are directly attributed to artificial intelligence. This is not normal. Entry-level technology positions are down. Gen Z is suffering. 67% this year they're down. The IMF in the meeting recently said most countries and businesses are not prepared. Yes, they're not prepared. When you hollow the knowledge worker pipelines at this speed, and we're talking about speed, and no transition framework, which connects to the peace framework, you don't produce unemployment statistics. You produce social conditions for radicalization of youth around the world. This is the peace risk hiding inside every quarterly earning call. And that's what I want to leave you today.
Mark, thank you for a much needed and bracing wake-up perspective. A follow-up question before we move to a final round of perspectives. You advise governments, enterprises, and multilateral efforts on AI and digital transformation, including the UN's work on digital government and initiatives. What does it mean in practical terms to make peace a design principle in digital infrastructure? And in that, how can we address what the father of AI, Nobel Peace Laureate Geoffrey Hinton, said, that AI is developing at a rate that even he didn't expect? And even as another perspective, the Bletchley Park discussions under former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak created a framework, but we haven't seen anything since on safeguards and common ground and common frameworks among nations.
It's a deep question with a lot of points. First of all, I want to come back to the chairman and CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, who basically pointed out that we have to get stronger if we're going to tackle inequality, mistrust, and fragility, and all of those issues. AI is going to get ahead regardless. It will speed up at speeds that we have never seen before. And what Professor Hinton talks about is this evolution that AI is going to get smarter by the second, and we're already leading in AGI. But that doesn't mean that we, as professionals, as leaders, are going to stop. We have to do much more, as Jensen says. We have to do much more to make sure that we protect the public. And you could see all of that, as I mentioned, technology layoffs, many of them are attributed, but we have to figure out what the guardrails are. How do we create the right social preconditions? What do we do in terms of social contracts? What do we do in terms of what diplomatic frameworks can absorb today and have to absorb today? We have to figure out what users are capable and what they're dependent upon. We already spoke about autonomous weapons. We spoke about issues related to energy, about open source health and everything else. We have to figure out how we strengthen people with resources. The governments are fragile. And we don't, instead, they're moving into what I call surveillance AI state under the banner of smart cities. We need to stop this. We need to figure out what would be this multi-stakeholder governance capability and how would we make sure that we work on this multi-stakeholder governance. Look, I see something called greater fragmentation happening right now that people are not seeing. Simultaneous fracturing of supply chains, simultaneous fracturing of the alliances, of our information, of our labor markets. And we have to do something about. We're already seeing what's happening in the Gulf with the oil prices. The geopolitics is stepping in. So we are now have to step in as responsible leaders and figure out what would this new social contract will be for capital, for talent, for infrastructure, and for decisions. This is why peace must become a design, not only become a design challenge. We got to focus engineering and we got to bring it to reality. And finally, I would say that we have to build a new social contract that hasn't been built before. Social contract has to be built properly right now and in the world. And we have seen already something called Sovereign AI Compact for Critical Infrastructure, modeled not under UN treaty, but under Montreal Protocol, which has moved in 18 months because science was so fast, was so undeniable. We got to do much more than that to make sure that we have shared standards for AI and critical systems, as all of the distinguished panelists spoke about: energy, health, water. And we got to make sure that mutual AI incidents are reported immediately. We don't have a system for that. UN hasn't designed a system for that. Autonomous systems can cause cascading failures on energy and health. And we got to learn on this immediately before it happens. We got to have full alignment and full trust in this infrastructure. The window is open, but it's a very short window because things are moving so quickly. In 18 months, we have to, as AI moves to this next level of AGI, and this reasoning and the strategic thinking, we gotta move fast to make sure that it's not just systems, it's outcomes and trust.
Thank you, Mark. It is indeed a short window, and this webinar is a call to action. Before we turn back to our esteemed founder and president for Peace in Motion, I'd like to do a very quick lightning round with each of our distinguished panelists to say in one simple sentence, what is the single most important contribution your field can make over the next 18 months? And then we'll move to closing. Thank you. Dr. Stillman.
Well, I think the best thing we could do in science and actually in all of these areas is education, educating populations across the world, and so supporting them to have an economic benefit that will help them avoid conflict. And to the point about AI, I think all revolutions have brought both negative and positive effects. And I think one of the things that we should do with AI is to really educate people on what AI really is, what its capabilities are, and how everybody can contribute to limiting the downsides of AI. So I think education is one of the things that we really need to focus on across all of these areas.
Thank you, Dr. Stillman. Liz Hume, from your perspective, peace building and policy making, what can we do?
So we have to demand it. No one's going to come and save us. We have to do this work. And Mark, I couldn't agree with you more. The window is there. It's open. The challenges are great, but we have overcome greater challenges, historically. So we have to work together collectively. We have to demand it. Uh, we can't stay in our little siloed hubs. On that note, the Alliance for Peace Building on May 20th has a peace tech sessions where we're, seeing what can we do, what's harming, what's good. So we invite you all to that. Registration will be up soon. But once again, we have to demand that we work on conflict prevention and peace building. It does cost money, but it's a lot cheaper than war. And we have to get out of the way that we think that prevention is hard and our brains don't think that way because it's too far, it's 10 years down the road. But collectively, we have to do this together, demand it.
Thank you, Liz. Gordon Winston, energy, infrastructure, and environment. What can your field do to help make peace over the next 18 months?
I think that the framework that have been collectively introduced by the panelists is meaningfully echoed in the statement that the infrastructural capabilities must be designed with the same framework that Mark talked about. Sovereignty, security, resiliency, redundancy is terminology that needs to be implemented. Designing a system or a series of systems that address these holistically requires the convening of people like these and those participating on this call. But there's also an empirical and a pragmatic question to the enabling of this. I've come to learn in life that ideation is simple, but translation is very, very difficult. And ultimately the commercialization of good ideas is not an easy thing. But I do believe that's really where this discussion goes as a follow-up. How is it specifically that we can integrate and contribute to building a system that addresses many of the principles that Mark has addressed, but it's also built into the foundation of stability of the nation and the true understanding that we really don't know the breadth and scope of which the next level of, whether it's agentic AI or this sort of knowledge-based frameworks that don't have guardrails in them, the specifics of what those outcomes will be. We need a systemic approach.
Thank you. Mark Minovich, 18 months. What can we do in AI, technology, and digital infrastructure?
Lindsay, in 18 months, the whole world will be upside down. We're not going to even recognize this. 18 months in AI time is just incredible, even in a day, even in a week, what's happening right now. But as Bruce and Elizabeth and Gordon mentioned, something is missing here. We're seeing this, at least from my angle, this sovereign AI is taking place. Everybody's harboring their own resources, protecting their own resources. But we need sovereign AI to work for a peace architecture, not just fragmented acceleration. Peace architecture has to be the endpoint. It should be the shared imperative, and I believe, and genuine alignment for all of us on this call. We don't have the same language. All of us, we come from different backgrounds, from different geographic areas. There's no shared language between the people, but yet we have to build this infrastructure together as people, as humans. We're going to build a new peace framework. Howard Lutnick, our Secretary of Commerce, mentioned globalization is no longer. So if globalization is no longer and we're relying on a different framework, we have to build that framework together. So your words, Gordon and Elizabeth and Bruce, they did really, they're very important. We have to close this translation gap that we're seeing. We have to make sure that infrastructure architects are sitting in a room with peace builders, not by accident, but by design. And we got to keep building the systems that are technologically sophisticated, but also strategically important for the world. And one final thing, AI, most important contribution, Lindsay, in the next 18 months, and maybe even shorter, I would even say in less than a year, has to be in building trust. Building a trust where trust doesn't exist. in infrastructure to make sure that human disagreements, they will survive. And that must start today. And it started today because of the work that Barbara has done, making AI systems legitimate, make sure that they're contestable, make sure that there's governance across all borders, not just within. And that's the future we desire. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you to all of our panelists for helping to frame this conversation with such depth and clarity. To close our program, I'm pleased to turn back to our esteemed leader and inspiration, the founder and president of Peace in Motion, Barbara Winston. Barbara, over to you to close.
My dear audience, as we come to the close of our time together today, I want to pause and reflect on what this gathering represents. What we have shared today is more than a conversation. It's much more than the launch of a new initiative. It is the public beginning of a shared undertaking, the launch of the Cooperative for Humanity. I must tell you that I have goosebumps because the conversation has been so meaningful and inspiring and frightening. This moment is deeply meaningful to me because it represents the continued unfolding of a vision that we first introduced several years ago, that peace must be understood not only as an aspiration, but as something that can be intentionally constructed. Since that time, through dialogue and partnership research practice, that vision has become more defined. We've come to understand more clearly that peace endures when the systems shaping human life are aligned with dignity, well-being, opportunity, responsibility, and big imagination. That understanding brought us to the framework that we have discussed today, the DNA of peace. It's shaped by the health of our institutions, by the quality of our education and culture, by the resilience of our energy and environmental systems, and by the technologies and infrastructures we are building at extraordinary speed. These are not isolated pillars. They are interconnected conditions that make peace possible. Together, they form an integrated architecture through which peace can move from idea to practice. That's why the Cooperative for Humanity matters. It's our way of widening the circle of peace leadership. Synergy, existential challenges, and emotional contagion, the nucleus of a global ethic, the fountainhead of a new worldview. I keep returning to the image of Grand Central Station, a place where many paths converge, where movement is activated, where individual routes become part of something larger. Now, that's how I see this cooperative, not as a single voice replacing others, but as a place where many voices, many disciplines, and many forms of leadership come together and gain strength through connection. We have to galvanize multilateral efforts, and that requires us to think beyond incremental momentum. We can't build the future with yesterday's assumptions. We are presenting today an invitation to those who are ready to help build the infrastructure of peace with seriousness, imagination, and shared purpose. We are developing here a global brainstorm, a fountainhead of a new worldview, and we must be obsessed with efficiency, powerful muscle, agility, and an irresistible force of determination. So today, with much gratitude and conviction, I invite you to join us in this Cooperative for Humanity, to join us in helping to build the living architecture of peace, to join us in advancing a vision of peace that's not passive, but designed, not distant, but practical, and not fragmented, but shared. This is the work before us, and this is the chapter we now begin together. How formidable is this challenge? How absolutely riveting is this challenge? And as the astronaut, the young lady Koch said, a beautiful blue planet, a gem in the darkness. We have a shared humanity, a shared destiny So I thank you for your partnership. I thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your belief in what is possible. Thank you, Dr. Stillman. Thank you, Liz Hume. Thank you, Gordon Winston. Thank you, Mark Minovich. And an enormous thank you to our magnificent Lindsay Howard. I really pray to God that we can fulfill this obligation, and I know that we can. We can, if we can go where we just came from, farther than ever, and with all the crucible, with the fire and they circled the earth. They went over almost 1 million miles. They came back in 10 days and then had a press conference. Nuts. We can do this. I want to thank my team, Cooper and Jordan. I love you. And I want to thank each of you. I love all of you. We are together in this great, great journey. I pray to God that we can fulfill this. Blessings. All of you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.